He was once a little green slab of clay. Now he's over 70 years old today. We're talking Gumby, damn it, this week on Brio TV, the podcast. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Bill Brio, and we're heading into the vault, back where I keep my collection of interviews from the past. And this one, it's a relatively recent conversation from 2015 with Joe Clokey, the son of Art Clokey, who created and animated the early TV adventures of Gumby and Pokey. If you're old enough to remember the words to the theme song, you'll want to listen in. Gumby was a green plasticine figure first tested as a feature on the Howdy Doody show back in 1955. Clokey had been fooling around with animating the figure for a year or so, so when the opportunity came up to create a children's series in 1956, he was ready. As son Joe relates, his dad Art kept going back to the Gumby well with new incarnations every decade or so. The series even got a big boost in the 1980s when Eddie Murphy started goofing on Gumby, yelling, "I'm Gumby, damn it," on Saturday Night Live. Several generations of kids have grown up now with Gumby, and some who maybe only knew him from the bendable toy figures, which sold in the millions. The little green slab of clay is still rolling, with 20th Century Fox planning new spin-offs of the series. I'm glad I got to speak with Joe Clokey, the keeper of the Gumby flame, who was like Gumby's little brother growing up in California, and after his dad passed away in 2010, he was the one who upgraded and digitized the franchise. He also wrote and directed a few spin-offs before his own untimely death from a heart attack in 2018. Here is our phone conversation from January of 2015.
Hi, Bill. Good to hear you.
Well, nice to talk to you. I'm certainly grew up a big fan of your dad's work. I'm 57, so I'm not quite as old as Gumby, but up there.
Yeah, I'm not as old. I'm 53, so I got you. I hear you there. It's a bit shocking in a way that it's the 60th anniversary. So you're actually younger than this creation. What are your memories of the early days of your dad's work on this series? Well, I have really strong memories because I was born in '61, and that's right when they opened up a brand new studio to do a new series, and they did a new Gumby series throughout the 1960s. And those episodes and also the 50s episodes are the ones being featured on Teletoon Retro. And it was brought back a lot of memories when I was remastering them from the original film rolls, which were on Kodachrome film, which really held up, which is really cool. And the colors are amazing. The memories I have as a kid is spending a lot of time in the studio. My mom and dad would be there, and then later my mom, and hanging out in the wood shop. The smell of fresh-cut wood as the set builders were building sets and making props, and seeing the big toy shelves with all Gumby's toys for Toyland was really awe-inspiring. And then, going in the puppet room and the smell of clay and the smell of film in the edit room where they were cutting the film, and walking through these big doors. It was a plumbing warehouse where we had the studio. Gumby's only 7 inches tall, and it's a miniature world. But walking through this big doorway, and there were 10 animation setups with big camera dollies like you see in Hollywood, and all these tabletops with different sets on them. A mountain set or a lake or a town or whatever they were filming at the time. And it was so fun as a kid to see that.
It must have been. I can only imagine. This is your dad's job, is playing with these amazing toys.
It's really fun.
It must have been. And when you mention the Kodachrome film, I collect 16 millimeter films, so I have.
Oh, great!
Yeah, pretty much all my life, and I go to. There's a convention in Syracuse, New York, every March of folks who collect film, and we watch some stuff on 16 at this thing called Cinefest. But one of the fellows from New York brought up a reel of from Gumby from the very beginning, I guess, and you know this. it began on NBC and was shown on the Howdy Doody. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was audience tested on the Howdy Doody show, and it was a huge hit. So then NBC gave my dad his own show, the Gumby Show, and he made, 21 episodes for that. Those 21 episodes were later cut in half and made into 43 episodes to be mixed with the 60s episodes later in the next decade. But what I've done when I remastered them is I put them back together in their original 11-minute form. And the film that collectors get are usually prints that were used at TV stations.
But yeah,
and they're pretty cool.
They are, and as you say, the Kodachrome print that this one we saw, the color was astounding. Like, it was vibrant and very rich for such an old film. So that film stock really was a lucky choice, I guess, wasn't it?
It was, and the funny thing is that print is only about 1/3 as bright and rich looking as the original camera rolls, because the camera rolls hadn't been put through the technology of transferring. Because the technology of transferring back in the 50s,
right,
when they transferred to make the inner negative and then later the print, that you lost a lot.
Right.
And so now I was able to take the original camera roll, A and B, they weren't even edited yet, transfer them directly to high-def tape, and then I took the A and the B roll on high-def tape to my computer, and put the A and the B rolls back together. And as I did that, I was like reliving every shot in the 50s and 60s on Gumby. It was really cool. And what was neat is you could see things you'd never see before, because it used to be the colors kind of faded off in the distance. Now they were sharp, and I could see, those are paper cutout trees, or hey, that's cool how they did that set, or look at the color, look at the sunset color on that episode in Rain Spirits. Man, the colors are amazing. I mean, it was so fun. I was like a kid in the candy store doing this job. It was fun. I remember when I was a kid, my dad bought me a 4x8 piece of plywood, and in his basement, he had an A-frame up at Topanga Canyon, and he took me, I got into building model train sets in whole towns, and I'd build mountains and bridges, and, I think back, that was kind of like building Gumby sets.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, that's very cool.
I was lucky to have a dad like him. My dad was a great guy. He loved me and my sister, and that love he had for us rubbed off on all of the world's kids in Canada and the U.S. and he just he always said the Gumby episodes were a gift of love to children. He used to tell us bedtime stories. First my sister, and they turned into 50s episodes, and then me, and they turned into 60s episodes. And he always said it was a gift of love, and he was a creative guy, and so he had creative freedom. So he was able to. The episodes had a lot of heart and a lot of imagination and adventure, and they also had kind of a surrealistic creativity to them.
They did.
It makes them more appealing. They make them more appealing to adults too, because you look at them, wow, that's kind of trippy.
And, they are. What was your dad's influences? Where did that come from, do you think?
Well, his biggest film influence was a guy named Slavko Vorkapich, who was the head of the USC Films department when Dad went there. And Dad made him a guru, kind of. I mean, Dad went to a department and learned about filmmaking, and that's how Gumby was born. And the thing that he learned from Slavko that was really important was, and it's something that shows up in all these 50s episodes in a big way, is a process called kinesthetic film forces, he called them. And my dad described it was like being on a roller coaster, going up and down and twisting around. It's like massaging the eye cells. So it's the way you move the camera. It's the way you edit. It's the way you move the action. So it's not static. So it's actually feeling visceral to your senses. And Dad applied that to the first Gumby episodes, and that's why, like, the second Gumby episode ever created was called Mirrorland. And if you watch that episode, it's totally, the action is like more action than you see in today's cartoons. It's amazing.
Oh, wow.
And later when he did the 80s series, he did the 60s series, and they were still really cool. They had really clever storytelling and everything. They had a lot of it. You get later, and you get too many characters involved, and there's too much standing around and talking. It's the action and the kinesthetic film forces. But also, it's the reason Gumby keeps living in each generation and kids still love it is because there's a lot of heart there and imagination. And kids love imagination and adventure and heart, and that's what Gumby's about.
See, the other thing that really sticks in my mind is the music. It had a weird sort of, it sounded so 50s, but it was like that. Yeah. Was that created for the series? Was it a generic kind of music? Where did that come from?
Well, the very first episode, Gumby on the Moon, Dad created some of them himself. It's like we have this clavichord. My grandpa, who adopted my dad when my dad was 11, well, my dad's real father had died in a car accident in Michigan, and so my dad went off to California, and then he ended up getting adopted by this wonderful Renaissance man who used to take my dad. He was a musician. He wrote 223 pieces of original classic music in his life. He was this famous musician named Joe Clokey, and organist and full symphonies, and he used to take my dad on adventures. He spent several summers in Canada. He took him to Siberia, to Mexico, and they would paint together. He had a film camera in the 30s, and my dad he fell in love with filming things and adventure, and kind of where it all started. And then my dad did the same thing for me. He took me out. He took me to Canada for a couple summers.
Really?
He never took me to. I had these adventures too because my dad he took me to the Hopi Indian reservations, and I learned about Native American culture.
Wow.
And, my favorite Gumby episode is Rain Spirits because that's it's such a cool look into the Native American culture. I love it. And the adventures. I mean, everything. Gumby can do anything. He's a shapeshifter.
Yeah.
He and I think people like Tim Burton and Henry Selick, they've said there's something magical about the Gumby episodes.
Yeah, there are.
It wasn't like anything else out there.
More about Gumby from my 2015 conversation with Joe Clokey in just a moment.
Decider calls it a pulse-pounding restaurant drama that's a British cousin of The Bear. And Rotten Tomatoes, which they do not cook with in this show, says it's a culinary drama with palpable tension simmering beneath the surface. They're talking about Boiling Point, a 5-part BBC Studios production based on the BAFTA award-winning film of the same name. Set in London, Vinette Robinson stars as the head chef leading a new crew in one of the city's latest big-money, high-pressure restaurants. Compelling, intense, and very complicated. That's Boiling Point, premiering exclusively in Canada March 13th on Super Channel Fuse.
Well, it's no surprise that Paramount Plus has remained one of the fastest growing streaming services. It just shows you what being a sponsor here at Brio TV can do for a brand. Besides all the great originals you can stream anytime, such as Landman with Billy Bob or Mayor of Kingstown, here's what's new this month. Dennis Quaid stars as a once-beloved father-turned-serial killer in the inspired-by-a-true-story original Happy Face. Later in March, Guy Ritchie's new organized crime drama Mobland premieres starring Tom Hardy, Pierce Brosnan, and Helen Mirren. Want more peace and love in your programming? Paramount presents Ringo and Friends at the Ryman, a 2-hour celebration of the ex-Beatle at Nashville's Country Music Temple. Sheryl Crow, Emmylou Harris, and Jack White are among the friends. Another rocker is showcased in the newly remastered doc Tom Petty, Heartbreakers Beach Party. Finally, in celebration of Women's History Month, check out Women Move Mountains, Paramount's salute to the women who inspire us. And remember, there's a mountain of entertainment every month on Paramount Plus. And we're back with more Gumby Adventures with Joe Clokey.
Would your dad have been familiar with any of the works at the National Film Board of Canada, Norman McLaren and folks like that?
Oh yes, I think he was actually at Norman McLaren. He was. That name rings a bell because I think my dad talked about him.
Huh? Yeah, he wouldn't work in clay or three-dimensional. It was more he would scratch right on the film and create it. But it was very experimental, his animation.
Well, you know what? I think my dad was influenced by him, because when you see the rocket ship go off in Small Planets, the 60s episode,
yeah,
the blast of the rocket ship going up, instead of using the special effect he used to make it look like it was blasting off, was scratching the film.
Wow. So your dad was very resourceful.
He would do anything. He would have a human hand come in sometimes. He would he would use clay. He would use other materials. It was pure freedom for creativity, and it was he loved the three-dimensionality of stop motion, the fact that it was real sets with real light hitting it, and the clay was fun because you could shapeshift, and that gave another dimension to it. And
was it a special kind of clay, or was it just a clay that was bought at a hobby shop at the time? How did he come up with the right mixture for the characters?
Well, you buy the clay in the different solid colors. There's green and all that, but Gumby's not pure green. He mixed. The clay is a plasticine, and that's an oil-based clay.
Yeah.
And so when you massage it or get it warm, it gets soft enough to be able to mold and form. And Gumby, by the 60s, in the 50s, we just used rolling pins and like we made gingerbread type cutouts for Gumby's and Pokey's shape.
Wow.
And that's how we made Gumby. And we make trays of Gumby and to get ready, because the hot lights would melt them, so you have to keep replacing the Gumbies every few seconds of animation.
Wow.
And you'd reuse the clay. You wouldn't just throw it away. You'd just reuse it to make new ones. And in the 60s episodes, they started using double boilers, and they'd melt the clay and pour them into molds. And when they melt the clay, it would be a mixture, a secret recipe of green and blue and earth tones that make Gumby. Gumby's got part sky, part chlorophyll and green, and then color. And then Pokey is terracotta, the earth. He's kind of terracotta color. And it's a mixture. And so we have those secret recipes.
Nice. And the very early ones, Gumby didn't have pupil, or he just had the pupils. No, the white part of the eye aren't in the first early ones, is my memory anyway.
Yeah, the early episodes he had red eyes.
Yeah.
And then in the 60s he got black pupils, and he thought it worked better on TV. And then in the 80s series he did. Let me get away from that phone. I'm just gonna. Sure. In the 80s series, he did... Sorry, I got to walk away from that phone. When another phone rings, I don't know how to turn off that phone in this office, so I'm going to walk out, because I can't concentrate when there's a big phone ringing in my ear.
I understand.
In the 60s, he went to the black pupil, but... and in the 80s, he stayed with that. But then in the 90s, we went back... Or in the 2000s, I'm sorry, we went back to red eyes, but instead of round pupils, we kept the ovals that he used in the 60s. Right. And so now we feel like the red eyes work best with Gumby. They were red in the 50s, and we've kind of gone back to that.
Huh. And is it true that the unusual shape of Gumby's head is sort of modeled after a relative or something? Was there a...
That's right. My grandfather, my dad's dad. My dad had a picture of his father up on the wall, and his dad had a big cowlick that went up, and it was like, and if you put Gumby up against that, it's exactly that shape. Isn't that fun? It was just like his high school graduation picture, my grandfather's, and so I think that subconsciously rubbed off on why Dad shaped it that way.
Wow, you were saying how you would continuously remodel the Gumby out of clay, but do you have any Gumbies that were preserved from the early days? Do you have early renderings?
Well, I have a 1960s Prickle, and funny, Prickle was a foam puppet, silicone. He wasn't clay. But in the 80s, we had Prickle be clay.
Right.
And then it was clay. I think they mixed. Sometimes they would use silicone, sometimes clay. But Gumby was clay, and I didn't have a 50s Gumby or a 60s Gumby, so we made a mold to make those shapes. But then, so we've made some 50s and 60s Gumbies that are exactly like they were.
Nice.
But then a guy contacted me. We had this festival for Gumby called Gumby Fest last summer, and 6,000 Gumby fans showed up to celebrate Gumby.
Where was this?
The city it was in Glendora, California, where we had a big studio in the 60s.
Nice.
And we had some of the alumni that came, that I invited, actually came. Their first jobs when they were 19, 20 were working for my folks.
Wow.
And my folks taught them stop motion and all that. They went on to do Star Wars. They did the stop motion. That crew went on to do Star Wars and like 40 other feature films we all grew up on.
Oh, my God. Wow, that's amazing.
And they did the special effects and the stop motion for all those. They became the special effects stop motion wizards of the 70s and 80s.
Wow.
And even now. And then the late 80s series, those animators went on to do Nightmare Before Christmas and all the stop-motion films like Coraline since then.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
And so my dad really had a huge impact on the animation world because he kind of revolutionized things by making a clay stop-motion character a famous character, a part of American culture.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
And Gumby, people always use, every day I Google it, it's like every day Gumby's mentioned somewhere. Like a few years ago, Sasha Cohen was the big figure skater, and they called her Gumby-like. And, you know, when they talk about, you know, flexibility, they use the term Gumby all the time. So it's like, the Gumby is like a word now in our culture because
That's fantastic.
of what my dad created. And,
of course.
And then the clay animation stop motion is such an amazing world of animation that, and I know in Canada there's a lot of stop motion and clay animation done up there, and
over the years for sure, and even your dad probably was a fan of the George Pal Puppetoons too. I would imagine that they weren't clay.
Yeah, he was. In fact, one of the Sneaky Pete Kleinow, he was a famous musician. He did like 800 albums as session work or whatever. He was the session player on the steel pedal guitar on Joni Mitchell's Blue album.
Oh my goodness.
And then he did John Lennon's solo work. He was on all those solo albums as a steel pedal guitar player, and he toured with Linda Ronstadt. And he was in the Flying Burrito Brothers, and he was in the Byrds as a session man. And Sneaky Pete, though, his day job in the 60s was working at the Gumby Studios as an animator.
That's amazing.
And his night job, he was doing session work for the Byrds and forming the Flying Burrito Brothers.
Oh, my goodness. That's so cool. That's amazing. What a story.
So and then he wrote, my dad had him write the Gumby theme song in the 60s called, you know, If You've Got a Heart, Then Gumby's a Part of You.
Yeah.
And that's by Pete, man. And Pete always laughs. He says, all this music, all these years, and he goes, the Gumby song's been seen by 100 million people or more, and I only got paid a few $100s to make that one.
That's the one.
He said, I was really happy to get the money back then.
Who's that little green ball of clay? That song? That's the...
that song.
Yeah,
that's the one he wrote. And
that's amazing.
He played on a steel pedal guitar, and my sister and her best friend sang the chorus and
really?
the song of all girls. Yeah, all these teenage girls sang it. And
wow.
It's just... Whenever I used to do TV commercials for Gumby in the 60s, my dad refused to merchandise Gumby for the first 7 years. So from 56 or 7 to 64, he didn't merchandise. And in 64, because parents wrote in saying, my kid really wants to hold Gumby when he watches Gumby. Can you make a Gumby doll? So Dad made a Gumby bendable, and then a Pokey bendable. And he finally did it after 7 years of not doing it. And the first 2 years, they sold 13 million Gumbies.
Wow. I always had one. You know, they would sell...
Yeah.
Yeah, no, everybody... You're right. Everybody would have a Gumby for sure.
So the toy is like a Barbie kind of thing. It's like it's an icon. There's the adventures and the episodes and the character of Gumby, but then the toy represents something. Cancer patients, when they get this smiling Gumby doll that they can stand and play with, it makes them feel happy. And they say that a lot of hospitals use it for therapy, and it's really just the spirit of Gumby. It's been an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And
would you say
you know?
Dad...
And I mean, if my dad had had a good contract for toys, he would have gotten rich then, but he didn't. So the toy company got really rich, and the owner of that toy company was a really neat guy, and he would send us Christmas gifts every year for like 20 straight years because he was so happy with what it did for his toy company.
Wow, good.
Well, I'm glad he did at least that. And it seems too the same fellow who brought this 16 millimeter film print of the early Gumbies. He had some other stuff. I think your dad might have done even like little station IDs for NBC or early.
He did.
Yeah.
My dad did. The dinosaur show.
Right.
He did the opening for that. It was a dancing with a clay. It was a clay animated dancing rabbit that he animated. And then he had the NBC logo used to be that the peacock feathers coming out.
Yes.
And my dad did that in clay. He did that in clay.
Amazing.
And then later in the 70s. Later in the 70s, my dad took that footage and turned it into an art film called The Clay Peacock.
Oh, wow.
It was really fun.
That's amazing. And your dad, he just passed away not that long ago. Is that correct?
He did. He passed away in 2010.
Wow, okay. Wow. And
there's a great document.
Yep, sorry.
There's a great documentary about his life, a biography, called Gumby Dharma. That came out in 2008, and it's really cool. You got to check it out. It's on YouTube. You should check it out.
I will. Okay, that's fantastic.
We'll be back in a moment after this brief message. Time once again to speak with Emily Gagne at Hollywood Suite. Emily, this is a big month. What do you got for us now?
Well, as you may or may not know, March 8th is International Women's Day, and we are celebrating all month long with movies made by women in film. So that means women in front of the camera, behind the camera, but I'm really excited about the movies that are directed by women that we have, like Dance Girl Dance, Daisy's Real Genius, The Watermelon Woman, The Matrix, American Psycho. We've got so many options for you to explore this month.
I hear you got you got an Oscar tie-in, I believe, right?
We do. We have The Black Box Diaries, which is a documentary made by a journalist about her sexual abuse case, and it is nominated for Best Feature Documentary at the Oscars this year, so you don't want to miss it.
All right, that's exciting news. What about anything that's, more from the mid-century, say?
Oh, we've got something special. It's the 75th anniversary of All About Eve, and we've got it on demand in March.
Well, fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy ride all month long on Hollywood Suite. Emily, thanks again.
Thanks, Bill.
We're back.
Wow, well, it's such a happy story and very creative. Those films are, they were fascinating to me as a kid, and I think you're right. A lot of it had to do with how the movement and the color and just how, although I probably watched them all in black and white TV sets, but they were like little silent films in many ways. You're right. It was more, just the art to it was very inspirational as a kid. So hats off to your dad. Yeah. You're lucky to have grown up with surrounded by all of that. It was pretty cool.
My dad had a lot of ups and downs in his life, and he, by the 70s he was broke, but then Gumby would roar back and he'd do a new series, and it's like Gumby just kept having a life because the kids of the world and the kids in all of us just keep wanting more adventures,
When Saturday Night Live came along and started doing Mr. Bill, I guess they should have sent your dad royalties for that.
I know. Mr. Bill was a parody. They always talk about Eddie Murphy being a parody of Gumby, which he was.
Right.
The parody of Gumby was like the anti-Gumby. It was hilarious because Gumby wouldn't have a Cuban cigar and say, "Let me tell you about Raggedy Ann," stuff like that. Eddie Murphy was hilarious. Late night TV, but people don't realize Mr. Bill. was a parody of the very early Gumby.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Hand would come in and squish him. Well, if you look at go frame by frame on like the very first Gumby episode, a hand would end up in one frame because they'd take a picture by accident of the hand. That's why they're making Mr. Bill is all about Mr. Hand. Oh no, Mr. Hand! That was totally a parody of Gumby, you know.
That's funny. That's great. So what we're going to see on Teletoon then is a mix of the animation of Gumby over the years.
What you're going to see on Teletoon is, for the very first time, you know, I remastered the episodes from the original camera rolls, and they look amazing. And the Teletoon Retro is the first station in the world to air them this way.
Wow.
And it's for Gumby's 60th birthday, and his birthday is on January 29th when my parents created the character, and out of clay. And they're going to have a marathon that day on January 29th.
Nice.
And they're going to show those episodes, and they're showing all the 50s episodes and all the 60s episodes, or most of the 60s.
Wow, that's fantastic. How many are there episodes?
There's about 200. There's about 108 of those.
Wow.
And there's anywhere from 103 to 108 of those, and there's another 100 that were produced in '88.
Wow.
And then there was a movie, and there was a direct-to-DVD type. There was a clay animated movie that my dad did after the '80s series that was produced in the early '90s.
Huh.
And now we're working on new, and we're staying with stop motion animation, but we're working on new adventures
Nice. That's
so
great.
The next generation of kids can enjoy it too. But I'll tell you, go back to every fan will tell you go back to the 50s episodes and the early 60s episodes. And there were episodes in the mid and late 60s too, and they're on Teletoon too. Mm-hmm. But there is something really magical about those that work today.
Yeah. Well, there's something too about even the toys back then that they had it was back before computer-generated effects. There's something, just the handmade about it that I think kids especially could relate to. It looked like stuff you could make, and I think that was brought to life. That was just so magical. So certainly,
I agree with you. I think you just hit the nail on the head. That's another reason why Gumby resonates, is because what do the kids first do when they're little? They play with clay in this classroom, Yeah. And when they see Gumby, they go, I can make that. And if you go on YouTube, there's kids all over the world that make their own little Gumby adventures. They play with clay, and they become interested in stop motion animation, which is really exciting.
Where did the blockheads come from?
The blockheads kind of represent the mischievous side of my dad. There was this back in the 30s. I guess there was this cartoon strip called the Cats and Jammer Kids. Yeah, and they were these troublemakers.
Right.
Well, my dad kind of modeled them after. My dad modeled the blockheads after them. They're these troublemakers. They don't talk, and they're just up to no good. They're troublemakers, and but they're mischievous. My dad's part blockheads because he was mischievous, like my 11-year-old son. He's really smart and creative like my dad. He's mischievous. Sometimes these creative geniuses, they're mischievous. They have that spark in their eye, like, they're thinking three moves ahead of me,
Who did the voices on the show? Was your dad? Did he do any of the voice work, or did...
My dad was kind of the Mel Blanc of the Gumby world.
Wow.
If you watch these... when you watch these episodes on Teletoon Retro, my dad's Pokey. He's Prickle. Somebody else did Pokey and Prickle in the late 60s episodes, but mostly it's my dad.
Wow.
And then Gumby was like 3 different voices through the eras of those. And one was Ruth Eggleston. She was and her husband was the art director on the first. Al Eggleston was the art director on the 50s series. So, she was a young Gumby, and then Dal McKinnon in 1957, the second half of the 50s episodes was Dal McKinnon. He was a professional voice actor. He had done a whole bunch of, he was Archie and the Archies, and he had done all the voices for Bedknobs and Broomsticks for the Disney film.
Wow.
He had done, the voices for the Mary Poppins animated sequence. He was Cincinnatus on the Daniel Boone show. He was a standard kind of Disney voice actor. And my dad found him, and he became the voice of Gumby. So Dal was the voice of Gumby in 57 and throughout the early to mid-60s. And then in the late 60s, a woman named Norma McMillan was the voice of Gumby.
Huh.
And her real-life daughter was the actress who played Nellie on Little House on the Prairie.
Oh, my goodness.
And Norma McMillan was also the voice of Casper.
Oh, my goodness. Isn't that amazing, eh? All these links.
Yeah, and then we brought Dal, and then the 80s series, we brought Dal back, and Dal did Gumby again in the 80s and 90s.
That's amazing.
So, and my dad was pokey throughout. There was just one blip where he wasn't pokey, and that was the late 60s, and it was like, 10, 20 episodes where somebody else was pokey.
Do you still have any of the original tables and backgrounds that your dad shot the series on?
I wish. But I did. Did I finish answering that question? I have an original 1950s Gumby.
Right.
It was made in the 50s.
Wow.
And the reason I have that is because I've made replicas because we know how to make them. So I've got clay Gumbies. I've got clay Gumbies that I animate today, and I've got 50s Gumbies, 60s Gumbies, and 80s Gumbies that I can animate today.
Wow.
But the ones that were actually made then, there was this guy that when he was a kid, his dad took him to the studio to give it. My dad gave him a tour, and his dad filmed the tour when he was 11. When this kid was 11, his dad filmed him giving it. So there's pictures of my dad, younger than me, showing this kid the studio, and they filmed the studio from the 60s that I grew up in. I'm going, wow, I remember that, and I've got it on film. And my dad gave him an original clay Gumby that was used in the 50s episode.
Wow.
And this guy got in touch with me last year when we were having this festival in Glendora called Gumby Fest, I think I mentioned.
Yeah.
And he gave me the clay Gumby. He said, it belongs with you.
Wow.
And I go, well, we'll have the whole story behind it. When we show it in museums, we're going to put the letter that my dad and you wrote back to each other up on the wall, and it'll always be preserved and never sold. It's just going to be used to display.
That's amazing. What kind of shape was it?
He kept it all those years.
Was it in good shape?
Bad shape.
Yeah,
No,
I would
it's in
think.
terrible
Must have been
shape.
pretty granular.
You can see he tried to fix it a little bit once and he used the wrong color clay, but you can see that the head's intact.
Wow.
And the whole body's there, but, it was definitely one that was used to animate, so it's not like this pristine puppet because it was a used puppet.
Was there a wire for the arms on Gumby, or?
Yeah, there's always a wire armature inside the clay so they can animate it. Yeah.
Nice, yeah. Wow, amazing. Well, very, very cool. I'm dying to see the shows. Look forward to that. And thank you for all your time on the phone today. I guess you're doing a lot of the promotion for the show?
Sure, yeah, and whatever Teletoon and Retro wants, because I love that they're airing Gumby out there. I think it's, we've always had a really deep connection with Canada. I found that Canadians love Gumby.
Yeah.
They write to us all the time, and I love that. And I was in Montreal at the Stop Motion Film Festival up there last fall.
Really?
And I was a guest speaker, and it was really fun. And then my dad and I went to Ottawa for the International Animation Film Festival back in 99 or 2000, and
wow.
That was a lot of fun. We really enjoyed that.
Yeah,
and,
no, I didn't realize they had a stop. My daughter lives in Montreal. She went to Concordia, one of the universities.
Yeah, it's at Concordia. They teach stop motion there. There's a guy that teaches it, and he has a stop motion film.
Is that cool?
Program, and it was great. Henry Selick was there, who directed Nightmare, and all of our animators worked for him on Nightmare, so that was cool. And he showed Nightmare Before Christmas. I showed a Gumby Through the Years reel, and we had a packed room, and it was fun. And then Henry Selick, my wife runs the studio with me. She's the head of the art department, creative, and I'm the producer-director type of person, and we combined, we do the whole thing like my parents used to do. And Joan, Henry, and I were able to watch like 200 stop-motion short films from kids and people all over the country and world. And judge them. It was a lot of fun. And Henry Selick really knows stop motion. It was really an honor to watch those films with him and see how he analyzed them. It was awesome.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, what was your mother's role in the Gumby story?
My mom, when my mom and dad were teaching school, they met at Hartford Seminary, and they were. She was getting her master's in religious education. Really bright, smart woman, and she was, and he was studying to be a priest. But he decided not to be an Episcopal priest. He'd rather make films. So they got married. They went to Hollywood, and they both taught for a while. And then he went to night school at USC. And when he got the Gumby gig, when they said make some characters out of this clay that you animated, my mom said. She came up with the shape of Gumby. She goes, "How about a gingerbread shape?" So she helped create the character Gumby.
Wow.
And then from day one in 1955, they were partners. She ran the studio. She was the producer. She hired the people, hired the animators, hired the staff, and kept everything running. And he was the creative genius behind the scenes doing all the work.
Wow.
Well, with his crew, there's always a huge crew that does everything.
Of course, yeah. No.
But sometimes he does it by himself,
That's great.
And now we're doing the same thing. My wife and I are doing the same thing, and it's,
amazing.
It's fun.
Yeah. And was your dad also involved in the Davey and Goliath series?
Yeah, my mom, her father was a Lutheran minister for 60 years.
Right.
And she had a lot of connections there. And they saw Gumby on TV in New York, and they said, man, Gumby wasn't religious, but they saw that Gumby was good-hearted and had an appeal to kind of a wholesome nature. And they said, we should make a cartoon using this stop-motion technique that could get across that God loves you, the fact that God loves you. Something simple and, it's just an outreach thing. It's not trying to turn people, not trying to convert people, but just to spread the message of God's love. To spread it's a simple message of God's love. And so they approached my parents, and my parents, they commissioned them, and my parents created Davey and Goliath. They created the characters and the adventures.
Yeah.
And the adventures have there's a lot of love there too. It's a love for children. And Davey would get into all sorts of trouble. And Goliath, I don't know, Davey. That's a whole other interview if you want to do that.
All right.
Well, that was Joe Clokey, a lovely guy, and I regret never having that opportunity to visit the Gumby studios up the coast of California and talking more about the other series, Davey and Goliath. I saw them both when I was a lad, growing up in Toronto. Gumby was one of those shows that just came across the lake from Buffalo, and I watched Gumby as part of the kiddie programming weekdays on WKBW's Rocketship 7 and the Commander Tom Show. So thank you, WKBW, and thank you, Clokeys. If you're looking for Gumby these days, you might want to check out Gumby Dharma, an hour-long documentary on the origins of the series. You can find it now at YouTube. I also want to thank producer Phil Hong for taking this little green ball of clay and turning it into a podcast. Thanks to BJ Del Conte, Paul Boudra, and the Crispy Critters, along with piano man Steve Dudley, for the music heard on these episodes. And finally, thanks to you, listener. If you liked what you heard, please spread the word. I'm Bill Brio. Thanks for listening.